Alright, so once again, I'm back with another segment to my podcast, Random Yet Meaningful Conversations, with your host, of course, me, Milan. So, in the last one, I talked about basically planting the seed and protecting it, right? And so I just want to expound on that further and go further into detail what I have gone through to basically give that analogy. Once the seed is planted, it goes through a stage of like darkness where there's not very much light. So I would like to basically just expound on that personally. So I probably will start from when I had discovered that I didn't want to live in North Carolina anymore and I wanted to move to Georgia. When I was getting ready to leave North Carolina, it was like a lot going on at that time. I had left school and I was basically in between jobs and everything, and I did stay briefly. I was working at Walmart, but they kept on switching my schedule, which inconvenienced me because I couldn't get to work on time or leave at a good time for me to get home due to the buses and them not, running after a certain point. So in that moment, it was just trying to figure out what exactly I wanted to do with, my talents and everything, because I had invested in getting the Wacom tablet, which is like a slate tablet. It's not a touchscreen. And just saying that I'm gonna, take the rest of what I have left from that job and, invest in something long term versus something stupid that wasn't gonna make much of a difference for me later on in life. So in that moment, I was going through a lot in terms of that, because I was living with somebody that I was dating at the time, and it wasn't very copacetic or very, I would say, simple in terms of that approach, because it was a lot, and we had roommates and whatever. It was just really annoying. And it's when you want to change, or that you need to, I would say, grow, and you're starting to realize that you're outgrowing your environment because it's not producing what it needs to for you to stay, or for you to, show positive growth instead of negative or toxicity. You kind of, go through, I would say, an isolation phase. So you go through an isolation phase, whatever. And in that moment, you're gonna understand that when you're trying to do something new and it's new to you, or if you're trying to go to a new level or a higher level in whatever you're investing in yourself, you're gonna go through an isolation phase, which may be a little dark. You may not have other people that understand, or the people that used to understand, they may question that you're not the same person anymore. And it's I would hope not, if you're trying to evolve and everything. But anyways, my point being, like I said, I was a young, adult. I was I have to think. I was jeez, I really was young. I think I was 20. Yeah, I was 22. 22 going on 23. I was actually very young. So I'm really grateful at that point that I realized that what I was doing and the people that I was around, they weren't going to be good for me to stay around if I wanted to manifest that career path or the lifestyle that I wanted to feel accomplished in. Because sometimes what we have to realize is that the people that you start with, you may not finish with those people. Meaning that those people, what I've realized, that a lot of people are very comfortable being where they're at. And they don't want to do the work to become who they're supposed to be. And when you as a person start to realize that, you can't be around those people, this is where you go through the isolation phase, right? And this is where you're going through a time frame where you have to think. It's a lot of spiritual inner work, right? And I don't mean like obviously like just praying to whoever you pray to. Like I said, I don't, discriminate in terms of like different religions. My point is, it's work within yourself. So that means you have to what? Meditate. You have to what? You have to self-reflect a whole lot. That's why it's like the darkness phase is like isolation. Like when a seed is planted in the ground, it's isolated from other similar plants. Is not saying that it's not in the same area as plants that are to grow, but it's by itself. It has to do the work to bud and everything into the plant that it's supposed to become, meaning that it needs time to itself. So in that part of my life, like I said, just left college. And like I said, I lost my job at Walmart. And I bought the walk home tablet, and it was like, okay, this is cool. And just looking back in that moment in everything that, like I said, that I was doing in terms of like hobbies or just like recreational activities, it was like basically your typical young college student type related stuff. It's like, they're young, let them live their life, whatever, right? But in that moment, I was just like, I'm not trying to be funny. You know how like you'll like do stuff just so you can like hang around different people and whatever, just so like to be sociable or what have you. Me in that moment, it was like I was inside, but then I stepped outside. It's like, I was within and I was without. It's like you're there, but like you're looking on the outside at all points of view. It's like a different perspective. It's like you're there, but like spiritually, you're seeing things in a different perspective. And it's just, like I said, when you want to do something that's going to change your family legacy or something that's going to break a generational curse or something that hasn't been done either in a long time in your community in terms of your ethnicity or race, or just something that hasn't been done at all, it's important to realize that sometimes the people that you would like to be there, they're not going to be. And that is simply because those people are not willing to do the work themselves to keep up with you. Meaning that when you're going through the isolation phase and you're just like, this is what I want to work towards, like this is what I want to grow towards, you're going to reject everything else, as you should, that does not align with that. And that can be hobbies, that could be recreational activities, that could be people, that could be things that you used to do. Whatever it is that's going to take away your time and energy, you're going to reject that or you're going to cut it off because it's not benefiting what you need to manifest, which takes precedence over everything else. Because the thing is, energy is very valuable as well as time. And when you're doing something or you're working on a project, you need your time and energy geared towards that. And that means you don't have time to give it to things that aren't as important, that aren't going to mean anything in the long run. You don't have time to give it to people who don't matter as much. It's good to always look at your environment or where you live also, because sometimes, like I said, you're going to have to move away from certain people, move away from family, or it could be you have friends that you gotta, let go of, whatever. Because like I said, I just left college at that time. Like I said, I was around a lot of my friends here and there from then, a lot more. And so it's like in that phase where you're having to like really realize that what you want to do, if those people are going to help you get there, or are they going to criticize you, make fun of you, and drag you down while you're trying to get there. And if they're the type of people that's going to criticize you and drag you down to get there because they feel like what you're working towards is something that they feel like isn't as important, or I would say we're more so envious, so they feel like it shouldn't be you. Or then you have people that, they don't think the way that you think about life and things. They're going to criticize you, and those are the worst people to be around. Like, there's constructive criticism, and then there's just negative, condescending criticism that has nothing to do with what you're doing, and it has nothing to do with trying to improve what you're doing either. So my point being, like I said, I just remember me living, because we were like in a student apartment type deal. So you like have roommates and everything. It's like one centralized like apartment where like you have like a common area and a kitchen, but it's like different rooms and everybody gets their own room, whatever. And it's just like I remember living there and just saying that, you know, I want it better for me. And not only that, but it's like sometimes you could want better for you and other people. Because like I said, I was dating somebody at that time. And like I said, I wanted better for them. So I wanted to be better for me so that I could be better for them, only to discover later on we were never, ever honestly supposed to date, let alone get that far. So, like I said, sometimes you have to realize that some people that you may start with, you may not finish with, because as you evolve and metamorphosize into the person that you're supposed to be, that means a lot of people aren't going to be there. So, just to expound on that a little more, is that when you're growing towards like your purpose and what you know you need to do in life, is not just that's what I want to do, but like you know that's what you need to do, because that's where your creativity or where you're happiest the most. That's how you know you need to do that. And when I say happy, it's like it's not something negative. It's not something that's going to hurt people. Like, no, it's something positive that helps you, as well as it has the potential of unlocking other people's abilities and making other people realize that, you know, that they can do what they need to do also if they, you know, try. And what I mean by that is sometimes the people that, you know, you go to school with, or sometimes your family, they don't really understand what you're supposed to do. That's why I said in the last one, when you know that you're supposed to do something and it's not something that your mom and dad told you that you need to do. It's not something that your pastor, first lady told you need to do if you go to church, your rabbi, if you guys are, you know, Jewish, I don't know everybody's religion. Or it's not something that, you know, anybody physically, verbally said that you need to do. It's something subconscious, something spiritually that is put in you. And it is heavily implied that that's what you need to do. And when you start to work towards that and you're around people who aren't so sure of what they want to do with their life, that can cause a lot of confusion. And what I mean by that is I went to college back in like 2015, right? Excuse me. And what I learned is that a lot of times people will send their kids to school, like college, and they don't know what they want to do with their life. Luckily, my mom, the way I was raised, she always made me think about not just the present, but what do you want to be in the future? So constantly growing up while I was going through, I would say like the latter part of my elementary school years, like I would say she started to ask me what I want to do in a career. Probably around when I was like in the second grade. I know it wasn't the first grade. I think it was around the second or third grade. That's when she started to ask, what do you want to do as a career? And obviously as a kid, like it'll be this and then it'll turn into this. And then like for a long time before I graduated high school, I wanted to, you know, go into one profession. And I stuck with that throughout middle school. I stuck with that through high school. And that was great that I did, even though that's not the profession that I'm working towards now. But why I'm glad my mom did that is because not only did that, you know, show that I knew what I wanted to do in the future, even though I didn't go in that profession, but that means I had to have the grades to get into that profession, which means that I couldn't like play around in school. I couldn't not, you know, do my homework. I couldn't fail tests like to get into that profession, because I actually wanted to be a doctor. Like I wanted to be a doctor actually. Getting into like medical school and everything, that's not easy. But I used to have those books, basically whatever that test is they're supposed to take. I used to have those books to study like when I was like really, really young. Like she started buying me those when I was in middle school. And so my point is that if you don't, you know, teach your kids when they're young, what do you want to be? Because you're not going to always live with your parents, or you should not want to. You should want to be able to stand on your own. You should want to have your own career. You're kind of conditioning them to fail. So My mom at a young age, because she wasn't taught that at a young age, she instilled that in me as well as my sister. What do you want to be? Like, think towards the future. Don't think about the here and now, because it'll pass in a blink of an eye. No matter what you're going through in that moment, it's temporary. It's long term where you want to be. And one thing I've learned about life, the longer you want to live in this life, you have to think towards the future, because if you're not thinking towards the future, you're kind of cutting yourself short and you're cutting yourself off from life, because you're not aspiring to be something more than you already are right now. By the time I was 10, I wanted to be a neurosurgeon, right? I wanted to be a doctor, okay? That's what I wanted to do at that time. By that time, I was taking school a lot more seriously. By the time I got into middle school, I was in honors classes. I was taking advanced maths. By the time I was in, what is that? What is it? 6th grade? Yeah, by the time I was like in the 6th grade, I was taking honors classes. I was taking advanced math. I was getting ready to take a advanced like English class. So by the time I got to like 7th grade and 8th grade, I was in honors classes for pretty much everything. So once I got to high school, that was already like a known thing. So like my classes weren't naturally easy. They were more difficult. And that's because of the career path at that time that I thought I wanted to do. It's not simple, you know? So my point is that once I got to college, like right before I got to college, like when I was a senior in high school, I was like, because before then, like I was really starting to look at the pros and the cons of being a doctor and being on call all the time. And it's like, I don't want that. I wanted to travel the world, because at that time I was looking at a lot of different like countries, as well as I was also looking at just business, because I was watching a lot of different like business shows like Shark Tank and just other stuff as well. So I was really starting to pivot towards business, because I've always like wanted to like own my own businesses. And I always told my mom that briefly. So by the time I became a senior in high school and before I graduated, I was like, I don't want to be a doctor anymore, because they don't really get to leave very often. Like, you're always on call. And then if you have kids, it's like you're not going to have time to spend with them as much, because depending on what kind of doctor you are and how good you are, you're going to be on call whenever, so you might not have time to spend with them. And I was just like thinking about stuff like that, as well as if I want to go see family or if I wanted to travel and do whatever. Business gave me more of that option versus being in the medical profession. So that's why I kind of just dumped it, because I got to the point where I started to realize that I really did not like science. I was great at science. Like, I took advanced science classes, but when it came down to it, I hate science, low-key. It's like it's great to know, but it's like I didn't want to like major in something that was heavily science-based, because that's not my favorite thing to do. I'm more of a math person. I'm much more of a mathematician. I love math. Math is my favorite subject. You would think it should be literature, but it's not. It's math. But yeah, once I got older, I was just like, I was like, I don't want to be a doctor. And that was a shocking blow, because for years, like I said, I was like, I wanted to do that. And then right before I graduated high school, I was just like, I don't want to do that. And I did not know how to tell her, other than to be like, I don't want to go into that, field, and I want to go into business. She was like literally taken aback, shocked, aghast, and it was like, what? Like for years, like literally it was like for years, like, you've always wanted to do that. Where the hell is this coming from? Excuse my language. But literally that was the reaction, like, where is this coming from? It's like, what? Like, how could you do that? Like, literally, she was just like, you taking all the classes. And it's like, yeah, that is true. But it's like, you rather figure out what you want to do before you spend thousands of dollars on a dang on degree and you don't even use it. So it's like, whatever. So before I went to college, I was like, I'm just gonna, major in business. And that's what I did. I majored in business management administration. And it's taught me a lot from then to now. But my point is, before I even get into that, a lot of people that went to school with me when I had went to college, they didn't know what they wanted to be. And it's like the way I grew up, because my environment, don't get me wrong, I did not grow up in a, very, I would say, good environment. We went through domestic violence a lot growing up, so it was very chaotic, a lot going on there. So it wasn't always peaceful or copacetic. So when people who didn't go through any of that and some of the things that we had to go through with that go to school, that are my age, and they're like, they don't know what they want to be in life. And it's like, and this is me, I'm like, your parents, because some of these people came from, 2-parent households. I'm like, your parents didn't ask you redundantly growing up, because that was a redundant question being asked. What do you want to be? What do you want to do with your life? And it's like just astonishing to me that a lot of my peers, when I first started going to school, they did not know what they wanted to do, as well as they couldn't decide on a major. And so when you can't decide on a major, what happens is the advisors basically schedule the classes for you to take general studies, sort of the first 2 years. So like after your sophomore year, that's when you're going to get into the core classes. But before you do that, they're going to have you in the general studies, and then they're going to pick for you, if you can't help the decision yourself to be made, on what you want to major in after your sophomore year at that point. So you take your general studies the first 2 years, then the last two, those are your core classes towards your major. So a lot of people, they still didn't know what they wanted to major in. And when you don't know what you want to major in, what the college does, they'll ask you questions on what you like, what you don't like, and whatever they think is a good fit, they're going to put you in that, which means that now you're paying for what they think you should major in versus what you should actually major in, which is very, very dicey. That's very risky, because it's like college isn't cheap, and some of these kids, their parents aren't well off, some of them are, and it's just like, it'll always be weird to me, regardless of somebody's parents' financial status to put them through school. The real issue is, why were you not, asking or giving them pep talks on, you're not always going to be a kid forever. You're not going to be a teenager forever. You're going to have to be an adult, and you're going to have some way to support yourself as an adult. And you should have some type of career that you want to be in or work towards or whatever, and what have you. So it was just kind of weird to know that some people that I went to school with, they didn't, get those conversations growing up, which I think is very weird, because that was something that we constantly talked about when I was younger. So when people, when I was going to college, it's like your parents didn't do that. It just makes you think, like, where did the years go, or what time was utilized to prepare you for now? Because what you're going through now, in one way or another, it is going to help you in the future if you basically pay attention to what you're going through, harness whatever you need to in terms of intelligence or strength in that moment, and learn whatever lesson needs to be learned to help you be a better person later on in life. Like I said, once I left school and everything, because like I said, I was still in contact with some of my friends from like college, as well as I was like living with an ex of mine. Me living with like the person that I was dating at that time, and like them not knowing what they wanted to do, or at the very least what they like to do as a hobby, to try and get into that as like, a career possibly or whatever. It really kind of made me think a little more in terms of me, myself, and what I wanted to do and how I wanted to get to the career path that I am working towards now, actually. And it's just like, sometimes when you're like dating people and you're like putting the work in to actually do what you want as a career, and even though, like I said, the other person may not know what they want to do, and it's like, that's fine. But it's like me in that moment, because like I said, I was really young. I was like 22. And it's like, when you're young and you're dating, you're dumb. You're dumb. You're not as like intelligent or smart because, like I said, you're still adulting. Like you're a young adult. You're not fully grown. Like you haven't gone out in the world and experienced life. So I would imagine that you're kind of dumb when it comes to that. And it's just like I remember that moment wanting, them to want better for themselves. And sometimes you can want better for other people more than they want for themselves. And then at some point in time, you have to realize that you want the best for them, no matter if they wanted that or not. But you want the best for you, and you have to do whatever it takes to become that person, even if it means, leaving them behind and whatever. And so at that point, like I said, it didn't click. Like I said, I was already geared towards that, but it didn't click until after I had moved to Georgia. Because North Carolina, when I was there, like I said, I wanted to be a business owner, right? I wanted to run a company. In the part of North Carolina I wasn't in Charlotte, I was in Raleigh. And so Raleigh doesn't have a lot of black business owners. Like Raleigh's more predominantly white in terms of a lot of things. So it's like, and also there's not a lot of attractions there. So Raleigh is cool in terms of like, you just want somewhere to go that's not too heavily populated and is more laid back. It's not as fast paced as Charlotte. I can tell you that. I know it's not. Raleigh's building up in terms of the business sector now, years later. But it's like, then it's like, I'm like, I wanted to like do more. And the thing is, I didn't want to move up north because that's never like been my thing. I never wanted to like move up north to like New York or anything. Like in terms of vacationing, that's different. But my primary residence being up north, oh heck no, I would never want to move up north. No. So it was like, this is me. I'm like, I don't know if I want to go out west just yet. I'm like, I don't know. I'm like, maybe I'll go into the south. So I got a proposal to like basically take a trip to Georgia to like just visit for a little while. So I'm like, I guess I'll take up on that offer and just go and visit, right? So I go to visit Georgia, whoop-de-whoop-de-whoop. It's really great. Like, it's amazing. Like, when I first got here, I think what stood out to me the most is the forestry. It's a lot of trees. I like that it's a lot of like woodsy area. It's more environmental friendly. And I'm not saying that Raleigh isn't, but it's not as developed, Georgia is not as developed as North Carolina where I was at. Like, there's so many different parts of Georgia or just like in the Atlanta area where there's like just hecka trees, just hecka like forest and just wildlife because it's just that vast. And so I think what attracted me to Georgia the most is the vegetation as well as the potential that it had. But also, obviously, Atlanta is known for a lot of black business owners, something that I did not see as much of in North Carolina or even from like my home state. So that is honestly what made me say I'm going to go ahead and take this chance, because when I had first visited Georgia, it was right before the pandemic, because the pandemic hit in March. So we came to visit in like February of 2020. And so it was really nice. I really had a lot of fun because, like I said, I've never been in the deep south. So Georgia was the first state that I've been to in the deep south. So that was an experience in itself because, I'm just like, I don't know. It might be a little, little racist down there. I'm like, I don't know. And I'm black. I don't know how I feel about that. So that's always why I've kind of avoided the deep south, because I don't have time for that kind of stuff. But as I've gotten older, I've realized if you pay attention to your environment and your surroundings, you won't get caught up in certain things. So I'm not as worried about that now. But I was like, it's really nice once I got to like go and like see it in person. It's like, oh, it is really nice. It's like a lot to see. There's like waterfalls, there's nature trails, there's trees, forests, wildlife. There's literally so many freaking mountains and inclines around here also. So it's like all of that in one. And then if you want to go to like the very edge of Georgia, they have a beach. Ta-da! So literally it's like all in one. So yeah, it's really nice. I had went back to North Carolina And I was just thinking to myself, that I knew that I needed to make a necessary environment change, because it was the environment that I was in North Carolina that wasn't going to help me grow. And it's just like I didn't know exactly how else to break out of that environment other than to be like, I'm gonna, up and move to another state. So in March, like literally, I kid you not, like soon as we like decided to go ahead and go and like just move, because like I said, I was still like with my ex at that time. So as soon as like we decided to, we're just gonna, relocate to Georgia, find like jobs and everything, get like an apartment and, go from there, whatever. As soon as that happens, the pandemic hits, and it's like, dang, the pandemic couldn't hit a little later. It's like as soon as we decide to, we're gonna up and move and we're gonna, relocate, the pandemic. And why that's so significant is because I was already going through an isolation phase for me to grow into the person that I needed to become today. The whole world now had to be isolated also. It's just very interesting how I was already realizing that I needed to do some personal work on myself internally in terms of spiritually for me to be able to do the things that I want to do naturally. And it was just so loud that I needed to make that change that literally the whole world had to go through an isolation phase because the pandemic, there was a curfew. You couldn't go out. You had to stand 6 feet away from people. You had to wear masks. People were wearing gloves, everything was just happening all at once. That to me wasn't a coincidence. That was literally just me getting the reassurance that what I was doing was correct. And to be honest, it was great that I actually did come to Georgia at that time, because if I had to go through that in North Carolina, 9 times out of 10, I would not have gotten what I needed in terms of the spiritual maturity in certain areas versus here. And sometimes, like I said, sometimes you do have to move out of certain environments. You do have to move out of maybe the state itself, because it's not where you're needed to be for you to go where you need to go. Because North Carolina, it's known for certain things, but Georgia, Atlanta is known for a lot of different things. It's known for the civil rights. It's known for its businesses. It's known for, like I said, just attractions in general. So it's a lot of different things that Georgia, and particularly Atlanta, had to offer versus North Carolina. And once again, if you think about that, that's God taking you from one small space and starting to plant you in a bigger space where you're supposed to evolve into who you're supposed to be. The pandemic was funny, to say the least. It's like, how can I describe it? The pandemic to me is did it really happen? It's such a point in time where it's it's surreal. It's it happened, but it's looking on the outside in, did it really happen? And it's yeah, it really did happen. It's just weird and funny how it did occur. But like I said, it was just a funny space because things that normally would be open super late, they were closed. There were barely anybody on the road. And so my first, like I said, introduction to Georgia, especially the Atlanta area, I'm just where are the people? It's it's literally a ghost town. That's why I said, did it happen? And it's yeah, I was there. But it's just nobody was driving because, once again, there was a curfew. People were scared to go out. They didn't want to catch COVID and all that other stuff, which is understandable. So imagine that there's not a lot of people driving. There's not a lot of people in the store because Atlanta is very heavily populated. Very heavily populated. And so for it to not be a lot of people out, it was just what the heck? It's I moved here to get the experience. I wasn't trying to get a repeat of North Carolina, let alone a watered down version of North Carolina. But after the pandemic, things went back to normal, and there's a lot of people in Atlanta. There's too many people in Atlanta because the traffic is it's horrendous. It is terrible, to say the least. It's it don't make no sense. But anyways, it is a lot of people. As I was saying before, when you're supposed to finally be planted. It is very important that you plant the seed in fertile ground. So that's why me reflecting to when I decided to move out of North Carolina to Georgia, and I was attracted to, like I said, the vegetation of Georgia, it was me being planted. That means I had to go from one environment that could have potentially stunted my growth or potentially just killed my growth altogether, and I had to be moved to a place where it was going to support my growth as a person. Because looking back at it now, like I said, everything that you do today does affect you later on. Because like I said, I was 22. That was 5 years ago. So 5 years later, I'm looking at all the different things that I've been able to accomplish that I wouldn't have been able to if I stayed where I was at. I realized that I needed to let go of certain people, move out of certain environments in order for me to tap into what I needed to spiritually to bring it out into the natural. Because once again, I bought the tablet that was, you could plug into the computer. It was really small. It's about the size of like a medium-sized notebook. And I started investing in that. And as time progressed, I got an iPad because I liked that I didn't need to be attached to a computer. I could just take it anywhere if I wanted to, and it's less things connected that I had to transport, and I could just draw basically in my hand like a regular notebook. I like drawing on like the computer screen, but it's just like, for me starting out, I wanted something like less in terms of like time. I'm not saying time consuming, but like in terms of like the display. So, and because I wasn't living like in my own place, that's also why I wanted a tablet, because it'd be easier for me to move that versus moving a whole desktop and potentially risking it getting messed up. So that's why I started off with an iPad. And in all honesty, it's very breathtaking to think about how I realized in North Carolina when I was just a young adult that I didn't want to keep doing what I was doing, or I didn't want to, be around certain people that I knew wasn't trying to go where I am destined to go, or where I'm working towards myself. Because a lot of people sometimes don't realize that until years later, but I realized that when I was younger, and I made the needed decision, so that where I'm at 5 years later, it's like, I'm glad I made that decision, because now everything makes sense. Because if I hadn't bought the tablet, I wouldn't have, learned how to do digital art on my own. And if I hadn't learned that, I wouldn't be working on basically the comic that I'm developing now. So everything is important when you're working towards whatever it is that is part of your purpose in life, or is part of who you're supposed to be. Every step is important. I think people always overlook the little steps that you take, because sometimes it's the little steps that help you get to the bigger steps, and people only credit the bigger accomplishments, or people only credit the bigger steps that they take, when in all actuality every step is important. But sometimes the smallest step is the most important, because that's you taking the step in the right direction, even if it's uncertainty. That's why I said it's like when you plant the seed, it's a phase of darkness. I didn't know when I had left school and when I had left Walmart because they couldn't get my schedule right, that number one, I was going to decide to work on a comic. Number two, let alone work on the comic, that I was going to move to a whole nother state. So imagine if I was still working at Walmart, and I didn't like working there because I didn't like how I was being treated, because every time I brought something up, it kind of got ignored and brushed under the rug. If I was still working at that Walmart when the pandemic hit, I wouldn't have bought the tablet. Number two, I wouldn't have been able to move somewhere that would have helped me as a person grow further, well, into who I am meant to be later on in life, let alone right now. So like I said, things happen for a reason. Like I said, I'm grateful that things did happen the way that it did, and I had to realize that I needed to get away from certain things or certain people so that I could become who I needed to be in this moment. Because just looking back, it's like I took the small steps with, simply investing in me. That's why I said sometimes it's you planting a seed in your own life. That's why I said the best person that can invest in you is yourself. Because other people, they're going to do what they think is the best for you, but you know what absolutely positively is the best thing for you because you're yourself. So other people can't tell you exactly what you need because you know what you need. And that's why I say, who better to invest in first than yourself? You want better, invest in yourself. Other people aren't going to do that until you do it first. And that's why I say I think some people fail to realize that you have to make that decision that you want better. And then other people eventually, invest in you because you want better. And they see that you want better. And they're just like, what you're working towards is something special, it's something unique, it's something different, it's something great, it's something good. It's not something, mediocre or something that isn't really impactful on society, let alone a community of people. The most important phase when planting or getting a harvest is planting the seed and making sure it's in the correct environment, because a lot of the times the seeds that are planted and everything, and I'm sure farmers or people who are gardeners or botanists can tell you, sometimes what will kill the seed is its environment before it even sprouts to the surface. So sometimes it's not in the right soil. Sometimes it's not put in the right space for it to get the sunlight needed while it's in the soil. Everything is taken into accountability, and I'm not regretful or anything that's happened. I'm grateful for everything because all things working together for the good of those who love the Lord. My point is that, like I said, nobody's perfect in life. I don't think life requires people to be perfect. Otherwise, everybody would fail easily. Everybody would fail easily. The point is, do you want to be the same person that you've been and you know is not the greatest thing, or you want to do better? And if you want to do better, what are you going to do to get to that, what you define as better as a person or for yourself? And sometimes, like I said, people get scared to face their self. And that's why I say sometimes you'll outgrow certain people. Like I did some of my friends from college back in North Carolina, because a lot of people don't want to do that type of self-reflection to the point where, like I said, you have to sit by yourself. You have to face yourself. You have to face what you're good at, what you're not good at, what you need to work on, what you're already good at, and you just need to, improve on that some more. A lot of people don't want to do that, and that's why people get offended when you're doing the work yourself, and that's why people will say that you're changing, and they'll start to criticize you. And I would just say get away from those people as soon as possible, because it's not going to work. I'm not saying that I experienced that with my old friends. I just realized that, sometimes when you lightly hint towards what you want to do in life, they'll make fun of you or tease you. And be careful of that. And why I say that is because anybody who really does believe in you, they're not going to make fun of you if that's what you want to do, because they're going to envision you doing what you said. Anybody who makes fun of whatever goal or desire that you have in life, they're not your friend. And sometimes we have to realize that, like I said, the people that you start with, you may not finish with. Because if I went based off of one conversation that I had with two of them back then, I don't think I would have been able to get this far and on the edifice of a breakthrough majorly on what I'm doing, because I would have believed what they had said and I would have stopped. And that's why I'm glad that I decided that maybe the best answer is to just, be respectful of other people, but at the same time just realize that you gotta let some people go too. So I say all that basically to just sum that up into, when you're getting ready to make a shift in your life. You may not realize how great the shift really is because you're living in that moment and you have life to deal with. You have obligations. So you may not think that, this little step is going to cause a huge shift in not just your life, but in the earth also. And that's why I say sometimes the biggest step that you can take is that first step. And it may be really small. But remember, that first small step is the biggest step because you wouldn't get all the things that come after it that you have worked towards making that initial step towards whatever better future in your life that you desire, that you want as a person. Don't despise the days of humble beginnings. Don't look at the fact that you took a step in the right direction, and of course it ain't going to immediately show. Like I said, I took the step towards working in graphic artistry 5 years ago. Not only that, but if I go back a little further, like right before I graduated high school, I said I wanted to be, a business owner. I wanted to major in business, and I didn't want to be a doctor anymore. But also, like right before I graduated high school, I was taking music production because the thing is, I was originally taking band class. I've been taking band since 7th grade. Yeah. So I was in band since the 7th grade, all throughout high school except for my last year because the thing is they wanted us to do marching band and I had way too many AP classes. I had a lot going on my last year of high school. It was very stressful. I passed with flying colors, but it's I didn't have time to add more stress to what I had to deal with outside of school. So I couldn't do marching band, but I wanted to do music still, so I did music production. And like I said, me doing that and me wanting to go into the field of owning an animation company, there's so many different parts. There's the graphic design, there's the animation, there's the audio engineering, there's running the business and overseeing daily operations. So everything that I have basically taken into account for has added up to me getting ready to manifest that as a whole. There's no part of a business that's more important than the other, because if that was true, then it would just take that one part of the business for it to stay afloat. Safe to say that every part of the business is equally important because that's what helps it run as a company. So my point is, what people need to realize, look at yourself as a company, as a business, right? Every part of your life is important. There's not one part of your life that's more important than the other. It should all be balanced. So my point being that we as people have to realize that if you want that to grow or you want to have that mindset, you have to take the step in the right decision to invest in yourself or repurpose your time or what have you towards whatever you want to make more of versus make less of in your life. So that's just what I have learned in regards to the isolation phase of when you're getting ready to do something that, once again, that maybe it's never been heard of from your family, because I promise you, there's the most people can say in my family, where I come from, they went into the military. I wasn't doing that. I wanted to do something greater. I wanted to do something so great that not only did they have to recognize that it was me that did it in our family, but billions of people around the world realized that it was me that did it for my family. That's what I wanted to do, and the military was not cutting it. That's not enough. Not for what I wanted to do in life. Whatever it takes for you to be who you're supposed to, I would say invest in yourself and put your best foot forward, because you never know how far you're going to go in life. You never know who you're going to meet. You never know, like I said, your own potential unless you actually take the chance to actually go and do that. So with that being said, that's it for this part of the podcast, and I'll see you guys next week.